Ityarchitena vihitam rajavala Matva vivastra plavanam vratachutim Tatpurtikamas tadashesha karmanam Sakshat kritam de muravadya mrikyata
Okay. Iti, in these words, Acyutena, by the infallible Supreme Lord, Abhihitam, indicated, Raja Abalaha, the girls of Raj, Matva, considering, Vivastra, naked, Apalavanam, the bathing, Rajachutim, a fall down from their vow, Tatpurti, the successful completion of that, Kamaha, intently desiring, Tat, of that performance, Ashesha Karmanam, and of unlimited other pious activities, Shakshat Kritam, to the directly manifest fruits, Nimuhu, they offered their obeisances, Avadyamrik, the cleanser of all sins, Yataha, because, translation. Thus the young girls of Vṛndāvana, considering what Lord Acyuta had told them, accepted that they had suffered a fall down from their vow by bathing naked in the river. But they still desired to successfully complete their vow, and since Lord Kṛṣṇa is himself the ultimate result of all pious activities, they offered their obeisances to him to cleanse away all their sins. Purport. The transcendental position of Krishna consciousness is clearly described here. The gopis decided that it was better to renounce their so-called family tradition and traditional morality, to simply surrender unto the Supreme Lord Kṛṣṇa. This does not mean that the Krishna consciousness movement advocates immoral activities. In fact, the devotees of ISKCON practice the highest standard of restraint and morality. But at the same time, we recognize the transcendental position of Krishna. Lord Kṛṣṇa is God and therefore has no material desire to enjoy young girls and sexual affairs. As will be seen in this chapter, Lord Kṛṣṇa was not at all attracted to enjoying the gopis. Rather, he was attracted to their love and wanted to satisfy them. The greatest offense is to imitate the activities of Lord Kṛṣṇa. In India there is a group called Prakrita Sahaja, who imitate these affairs of Krishna and try to enjoy naked young girls in the name of worshipping Krishna. The ISKCON movement sternly rejects this mockery of religion, because the greatest offense is for a human being to ludicrously imitate the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the ISKCON movement there are no cheap incarnations, and it is not possible for a devotee of this movement to promote himself to the position of Krishna. 500 years ago, Krishna appeared as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who practiced strict celibacy throughout his student life, and at the age of 24 took sannyas, a lifelong vow of celibacy. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rigidly avoided contact with women in order to carry out his vow of loving service to Krishna. When Krishna personally appeared 5,000 years ago, he exhibited these wonderful pastimes which attract our attention. We should not become envious or shocked when we hear that God can perform such pastimes. Our shock is due to our ignorance, because if we try to perform these activities, our bodies will be afflicted by lust. Lord Kṛṣṇa, however, is the supreme absolute truth and is therefore never disturbed by any material desire whatsoever. Thus, this incident in which the gopis gave up normal standards of morality and raising their hands to their head, bowed down in compliance with Krishna's order, is an example of pure devotional surrender and not a discrepancy in religious principles. In fact, the Gopi surrender is the perfection of all religion, as Srila Prabhupada describes in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Gopis were all simple souls, and whatever Krishna said, they took to be true. In order to be freed from the wrath of Vṛndāvana, as well as to fulfill the desired end of their vows, and ultimately to please their worshipful Lord Kṛṣṇa, they immediately abided by his order. Thus they became the greatest lovers of Krishna and his most obedient servitors. Nothing can compare to the Krishna consciousness of the Gopis. Actually, the Gopis did not care for Varuna or any other demigod. They only wanted to satisfy Krishna. It's actually an extremely important series of points which are being made here in the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. In this pastime, this chapter, this verse, Krishna steals the gopis' garments. There's a few angles that we can take when looking at this. So we have here, externally, this pastime of a young male, and these ladies have been bathing, and he's actually taken their clothes, and he's asking them to come out of the water. And if a general religionist was to be exposed to this as an initial understanding of spirituality or religiosity, they'll be very confused. Very confused. And they will consider, how is it possible that these people, these devotees, can claim to be religious, God-conscious, spiritual, where they have this kind of philosophy, which on the external point of view may be considered immoral, may be considered mundane, so many ways in which a materialistically minded individual would perceive. So the first one we can understand that everything that we understand has to be understood in reference to position and goal. Right? If, for example, you perceive someone to be, let's say someone's taking money. Things can only be understood in relation to position and goal. So when Prabhupada in his Krishna book is dealing with the pastimes of Krishna, if you look at the standard or the methodology of his writing, he is always beginning by establishing the position. First the position is established, and then once the position is established, then the activities are unfolded. So who is Krishna? He is the supreme personality of Godhead. Not God. The supreme personality of Godhead. Very, very clear definition. His position. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha Anadi Adi Govinda Sava Karana Karana. Ishvara Parama. He is the supreme controller and the cause of all causes. So much emphasis is given on Krishna's position, so that when we then hear about these pastimes, we can understand them in the proper context. Aham sarvasya prabhavo mata sadam pravartate iti matma bhajanti mam buddha bhavasanamritaha. He is also the source of everything. Because he is the source of everything, he is also the source of all the other living entities. And then with that understanding, then when we hear these things, then the difference takes place. We're looking at we're perceiving the leaders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead from the standpoint of knowledge. And without knowledge, understand or trying to even hear these things can cause some, let's say, disturbance or some difficulty for the living entities. In the purple here, many wonderful points are being brought out. First of all, let's deal with this point about the transcendental position of Krishna consciousness. First sentence says, the transcendental position of Krishna consciousness is clearly described here. Right? So transcendental means just that. Krishna consciousness is more than simply a code of morals or ethics. Right? In fact, ultimately, there is no such thing as a code of moral and ethics unless it comes from the supreme source. Right? This has actually been understood by philosophers for a long period of time. Because if the human beings were to create their own moral code, it would have to be from the conditioned standpoint. Right? In other words, what you consider good or bad is based upon your situation. Right? You can't say that it's a universal. Not really. Because someone else may argue that I think something else is good. And then that's their opinion. You think something else is good. That's your opinion. You're both on the same platform. So why was one person's opinion supersede yours? Right? So on the material platform, by definition, you only have relative position. Relative position means you can only give relative understanding from the human point of view. Right? Therefore, ultimately, religion, right, the ultimate system of morality must come from the source of everything. Right? This is logical. Right? How everything works is determined by Krishna. How one can get the full benefit of interacting with anything must also therefore come from him, because he created it. Right? Isn't it the case, like in the material world, they sometimes do what's called longitudinal studies. There's an interesting thing about how so many drugs which are produced now, they're often given to people and they haven't done tests for a very long period. Right? They haven't tested it for 20, 30 years. They may do it for 5, 10. And then people will take these drugs and it may seem that their treatment is actually working in the short term. But then you find out 30, 40 years later on that there was some longer term ramifications which they weren't aware of, which caused them some serious suffering. Okay? So in a similar vein, when we do not act on the guidance of Scripture, whatever you do may actually work in the short term. It may even seem okay in the midterm, but in the ultimate essence, you can't actually get a superior result than you can by following Krishna. It's not possible. Right? Therefore, this teaching of Srimad Bhagavatam is given from the perspective of eternality. Right? That is just one of the special features of the Srimad Bhagavatam. What we're given here, this will work for everyone for all time and for every situation, for people from all cultures, every experience. Sometimes people say, well, I think Christian consciousness is good for you guys. I think religion is good for a certain kind of people. They get something from it, but I'm different. Right? I'm different. And how do you argue? If it's your creation, you can't say anything. Because you don't know what they would necessarily need if you're just diagnosing it upon your own perspective. But Krishna created that. Or he is the source of all people, all personalities. He can therefore say this is good for everyone. But Krishna consciousness actually transcends morality, or mundane morality. Mundane morality. Because ultimately, if Krishna is pleased, the ultimate satisfaction is present within every person's life. That's the point. And this is an important foundation, because when we're looking at this, what we're really being exposed to is the difference between lust and love. There's a definition that is given in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. That lust means to gratify our material senses. And love, pure love, prema, is to completely and selflessly gratify the senses of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the difference. It's a very marked difference. And therefore, as we read here, the purport says, or the point is made in the purport, that Krishna was acting in this way purely for the selfless satisfaction of his devotees. Right? There wasn't an ulterior motive. And likewise, the gopis being the topmost servants, everything that they do is purely, unadulteratedly for the supreme pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So first of all, we're meant to come or to endeavor for the principle, right? For this principle, that everything we do, everything that we think, every word that we speak, everything that we offer should be done as an offering to Kṛṣṇa, as an offering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when He is pleased, and only actually when He is satisfied, will there be actual, substantial, real satisfaction for the living entity, and not otherwise. Not otherwise. Right? So this is a science of spiritual ecstasy in one sense. Now, there's, as we said, externally it may look like male-female enjoyment. In the purple, it says here the greatest offense is to imitate the activities of Lord Kṛṣṇa. In India there is a group called Prakriti Sahaja who imitate these affairs of Kṛṣṇa and try to enjoy naked young girls in the name of worshipping Kṛṣṇa. Now if you take out the last part of the sentence, in the name of worshipping Kṛṣṇa, then just this enjoying propensity, this is the affliction that everyone has. Right? This is our fundamental enemy of spiritual advancement. Right? This desire to, what's the word? Ishvaraham aham bogi. Right? We're trying to be the controllers and the enjoyers artificially. It doesn't work. It doesn't actually work. But we try. We try. And in doing so, in trying, we ultimately fail to achieve what we're actually looking for. Right? You see, the living entity cannot relate to being unhappy. Right? You can't relate to it. Just like if you ask, the queen to live in a council flat, she can't relate to it, right? You understand? From birth, she's brought up in very palatial environments, dealing with very distinguished people, having money, and you tell her, right, we're going to put you in the council flat. Don't worry, you'll get benefits, right? You can pop down to the post office every week, every other week, whatever it is, and you can, claim something, have a pension, we've got a pension thing sorted out for you, a few different benefits. She can't relate to it, right? Because it's alien. It's alien to her situation. In a similar vein, the living entity, we cannot relate to being unhappy, right? Because it's alien to the very nature of the soul, Sat Chit Ananda. When we read these points in Shastra, we're meant to meditate upon this, try to understand the principle. It's like trying to take something and try and digest it. Right? The scriptures are not meant to be just heard, actually. Right? We're meant to, by hearing the scriptures in the proper mood, hearing actually means that it comes into the heart and it brings about a transformation of consciousness. So therefore, there are actually 3 stages. We first shravan, we hear, right? Then we manana, we actually contemplate, we think about it. Then nididhyasana, we try to apply the principle as it applies to us based upon our position at this particular point in our spiritual journey. Right? And in so doing, we actually transform ourselves, right? And so, how we move forward in Krishna consciousness, it depends on how we actually digest what we are hearing and how we engage in service with sincerity. A very wonderful point is being made that the gopis were all simple souls, right? Let's see. Yeah, this is a quote from by Prabhupada from Krishna book. The gopis were all simple souls, and whatever Krishna said, they took to be true. We should also be like that. Right? Prabhupada was one morning walk, and at one point he just stopped. I think he stuck his cane into the ground, and he turned to the voice and said, the trouble is that none of you believe in Krishna. Right? So we have the philosophy, it sounds good. And we come to the temple, we wear the clothing, we put the tilak on, etc. But we don't take it too seriously. Right? You don't have to believe it too much. You have to apply everything. Or some of these things, they're outdated, they don't really count right now. Like that. But no, actually, this is the most sublime thing. And the truth of the matter is we're not progressing at the speed that we can because we don't fully imbibe what we're reading. The wonder, the amazing thing is that if you look at it, these gopis, they said they're simple souls. Where did that simple surrender come from? Right? When you see someone who fully is able to, with their heart, right, fully, in a very deep and substantial way, just give themselves to the teachings of Krishna consciousness, it means that they've actually reached the end of all Siddhantic understanding. You understand the point? It means that's the fruit of the understanding. If you read and understand it properly, what happens? You become simply and fully surrendered. Right? This is a symptom. It's not that you just learn verses for the sake of it. It's not that you just understand the philosophy for the sake of it. Yes, if we have a scholarly nature, we must fully capture that by reading and trying to really contemplate. But the fruit of it is a purity of service. And therefore the principle of the gopis, this is, as Prabhupada says, they're the greatest lovers of Krishna. They're the greatest lovers of Krishna. And this is the lineage that we have come through. So many of our great acharyas, they have such exalted positions in the spiritual world. There's a story I wanted to tell, which also relates to this whole principle of sex life, because actually, sex life isn't just male-female interactions, but actually, sex life, the principle of sex life, is the desire to enjoy that which belongs to Krishna. That's actually sex life. Right? That is the root cause of our suffering in this material world. The desire to enjoy that which belongs to Krishna is sex life. There's a story of the Sankaracharya, and at this time he would go to debate different personalities. And there's one pastime of him looking to debate a person called Kumariya Bhatta. And this Kumariya Bhatta, he'd committed an offense to his guru, so when the Sankaracharya found him, he was lying on like a bed of embers. He was actually burning himself. And so the Sankaracharya approached him and said, I want to debate with you. Because at this time, scholars would debate on Shastra, different points of Shastra. And Kumariya Bhatta said, I'm not in any position to debate. So the Shankaracharya actually approached his wife. Right? And the wife, she was very intelligent. She said, okay, I'll debate with you. But he said that Shankaracharya said he's prepared to debate on any aspect of Shastra. So she said, yes, I'll debate with you, but I want to debate on the Kama Shastras. Right? And I want to debate from the point of view of Vigyan, right? From experience, realization, not Gyan. Right? So the Shankaracharya was a Naistika Brahmachari. She said, I have no experience of this. She said, therefore you'll be defeated. Right? So then the Shankaracharya, he actually went into the Samadhi for about a month. And then he entered into the body of a king who had just passed away. And in entering into that king's body, he gained experience, and then he came and defeated this person. Right? So even in those times, this understanding or this consideration of karma, lust, and the understanding of it was also placed in the literatures, in the Vedic understanding. Now, it's an essay actually called A Brahmana and a Vaisnava by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I'm mentioning this because one of the points which are given in this purport, let's see where it is. Prabhupada makes the point, yes, or not Prabhupada, but the writers makes the point that in the ISKCON movement there are no cheap incarnations, and it is not possible for a devotee of this movement to promote himself to the position of Krishna. Material enjoyment means the attempt to promote oneself as the Supreme Person. Right? So whenever we're doing that, we are actually distancing ourselves from going back to home, back to Godhead. And this isn't just to the materialists, this is to the devotees. Right? When our activities are not actually done for the pleasure of Krishna, when we don't have that consideration, we are prolonging our stay in the material world. Factually. I know a man is saying, well, I am doing it in Krishna's name, that doesn't change it because Krishna sees everything. He's within the heart. Anyway, the point that's been made in this essay by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he actually explains the psychological procedure of the downfall of the living entity. And this relates to this point because this idea of promoting oneself to the position of Krishna, that's Mayavad. This idea that ultimately we are God, we don't know it, we just practice something and then we ultimately realize it. So he says that there's different stages. He says that the living entity cannot be engaged. And this is interesting because whenever you see people who leave, you'll find that they go through these stages. So we can also reflect on these stages and see and protect ourselves to make sure that we don't go into that trajectory where we start to fall down and ultimately fall away from Krishna consciousness. He says that the living entity, because the living entity is by nature Krishna's servant, they cannot be unengaged. When that happens, or when one has no taste for service, one becomes indifferent. The first stage is they become indifferent to service. This indifference leads to aversion, and then one becomes attracted, increasingly attracted to the material energy. And beyond that, one starts to develop the propensity for increasing material enjoyment, and then one starts to enjoy and ultimately falls away. Right? He actually explains these stages in relation to the actual fall down of the jiva, but we won't go into that. That's kind of a complex topic. But it's a very interesting point. He explains that also when one gets to the point of apathy, right, being apathetic in devotional service, he says at that point, right, one develops a system of reasoning to kind of, explain away their behavior. And at that point, the impersonalist philosophy manifests, right? At that stage, right? So you're apathetic, and then you want to explain. The living entity has to, explain or give some reasoning for what they're doing, explain it away. So this point becomes the impersonalistic philosophy. Then you see Krishna's position becomes minimized, and our position as the so-called enjoyer starts to increase. Right? And that can also happen, especially when devotees make offenses. Right? Because the living entity is pleasure-seeking by nature. So if the living entity cannot get pleasure, within the devotional endeavors, they will be forced to try to eke out increasing degrees of pleasure from the mundane material energy. So right now, in the life of every single devotee, as long as we're not pure, then the material energy is always there. The material energy is always trying to draw the devotee away. But we're being protected, right? We're being protected by the mercy of the devotees, by the sincerity of our devotional service, we're being protected. But should we ever offend the devotees, your spiritual immune system will become weak. Right? And the way the material energy, she's so intense and she's so clever that she can plan to bring you down over a long period of time. It won't even be obvious. Small things here and there, just a few small things here and there. Prabhupada says she comes in like a needle, out like a plough. One time Tamal Krishna Maharaj was on a train in India. So he's sitting down, it was, quite packed, and at one point a small space became available. So there was one person who was there who looked like they needed a seat, so he called him over. So the man sat down, right? So first the man sat down, then the man called his big wife to come, and she sat down. So she squeezed in, then the kids, and actually forced him out of the space. Right? So he told Prabhupada said, yes, that's like mine. Right? She comes in like a needle, but then she'll take over the entire situation. If you give her a chance, she'll come in, it'll be small, but one small thing, then another small thing, and eventually you'll find your spiritual life is destroyed. So by us engaging in devotional service, we're only trying to take shelter. It's not that we're so powerful, we feel the material energy, she can't touch us. No, we're just being protected by Krishna. Technically, we're being protected by his devotees. The consideration is that the devotees, They're more merciful than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, why would we ever even get to hear of such exalted topics? Right? It's said that the genius of Srila Prabhupada is that he has rendered some of the most intimate activities and pastimes of Krishna in Krishna book. He has rendered them in such a way that even a neophyte can read them and not become disturbed. Right? That requires tremendous realization, right? And tremendous fidelity to the teachings, such deep understanding of the teachings and of the conditioned nature of the living entities within this world, such a careful understanding of both, that he can actually position the teaching. How will they understand it? They need to be given the highest thing. What does Prabhupada do? One of the first books he publishes is Krishna book. It's not something else, right? So therefore, he is given the topmost first, but in such a way that it doesn't disturb the living entities. Right? So we can understand that the goal is to ultimately go back, not just back to Godhead in the broad sense, not back to Vaikuntha. It is said that everyone who joins the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, they will find that they have an eternal form in Goloka Vṛndāvana. Right? An eternal form in the spiritual world, not somewhere else. Right? They will be offered that. Even if, they will be offered that by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So it is extremely esoteric. Right? It is extremely rare. And you'll see that. Practically speaking, how many people on the planet are devotees? And then of those people, how many are serious? How many are serious? How many are practicing seriously? Right? So we want to be one of those people who one day we will understand who we are in the spiritual world, right? Our position, our particular service, and even before we leave this body, we will be in that connection. Right? So when we leave this body, it's just one step into that realm that we have already prepared ourselves for. But that will only come through good association. That will only come through trying to deeply render service selflessly. Right? In other words, it doesn't matter what ashram someone is in, the principle is that the devotee wants to give up sex life. Right? Because we want to give up the desire to control and enjoy and to try to play or pretend to be Krishna. Because there's only one Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if we're in competition with him, we can't go back to the spiritual world. Right? And we can't even experience true devotional advancement, even in this life, to the extent that we hold on to this kind of materialistic condition. Let's see if there's anything else we want to add before we take questions. So, here in this purport it says that in fact the gopis surrender is the perfection of all religion. Prabhupada says that the last instruction of Srimad Bhagavad Gita is the highest. Sava dhammam parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sava papibhyo moksha yishyam masujaha. The final instruction is actually the highest. And it's interesting. Abandon all varieties of religion and surrender unto me. I shall protect you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. The truth of the matter is that the less we're concerned about ourselves and the more that we're focused on Krishna, the happier we'll be. I'll be honest, so many times devotees are so absorbed in their own problems. And it's actually a shame. Because there's a principle behind spiritual advancement, which is that we may have challenges in our own spiritual life, but if our focus is primarily on serving other people, you will find that the challenges that you have becomes minimized, and ultimately Krishna takes them away. Right? But when we're so absorbed in our own issues, then you'll find that they actually expand. I was thinking of doing a presentation on Vedanta psychology, because in our scriptures there's so much information about the mind, and there's something that was written by I think Ramanujacharya on the mind, and there's a very interesting point that was being made in this book on this topic about this principle of dhyāya vishayam pumsa, the contemplation of the objects of the senses leads to attachment. So when the living entity contemplates, see, it's one thing to engage in sense enjoyment, but even the contemplation reinforces that samskara within the consciousness, right? We actually, your experience is reoccurring by contemplation, right? So that's why we want to hear, read and discuss, so that the spiritual experience is also reinforced and reoccurring by contemplation, right? You can reproduce even your positive experiences in Krishna consciousness simply by gratitude, by remembering just how much Krishna has done for me so far in the past, how much he's doing for me in the future, and in that joyous anticipation of how many more spiritual adventures we have together in the future. Or we can go the other side and engage in this sense gratification grossly or subtly, that we're thinking about sense gratification. And that will also, unfortunately, bring one further and further down. Because as I said, contemplation leads to attachment. Whatever we contemplate continuously, we will become attached to it. So ultimately, what do we want? Maya sakta mana praftam. Asakta mana. Krishna says, with the mind attached to me. So in hearing of Krishna's pastimes, in contemplating these pastimes, in serving the devotees properly, and in chanting the holy name carefully, we can't afford to be inattentive. Right? We can't afford it, actually. By carefully, Jiva Goswami says two things: attentive chanting and attentive relationships. Right? By these two things, we are guaranteed to make spiritual advancement and guaranteed to go back to the spiritual world. Right? Devotees are going back. I heard, I wasn't there, but there was one devotee, very senior devotee, very advanced devotee. I won't mention the name, but who lives in the UK. And they had spoken to one young devotee who I think has some spiritual advancement from a previous life. And this devotee told the other ones, at the end of this lifetime, both you and I will go back to Godhead. Right? So the person's relatively new, but they were told this by this other devotee. Yeah? And it's like that. Our movement stands for taking people away from this world. Right? Our movement stands for taking people away from this world. We have no business here. Right? If we were pure reading these pastimes, we would experience them as if we were present within those particular pastimes. But because of our condition, our blocks, it holds us back. We have no business in this world. Sometimes we emphasize how we're going to show people the validity of Krishna consciousness, how practical it is, how it's useful for this world. And there's many things in scripture which relate to that, and that's all well and good. But you should understand that ultimately we have no business here. We don't belong here. We shouldn't have even come here. Right? And now, through all these difficult situations, we just need to get back as soon as possible and take as many other living entities with us as we leave. Quickly. Right? Because this material world and this material body is like a house on fire. Right? If you don't leave, you will become burned, and even sometimes the experience will condition the person even more with other kinds of anarthas or difficulties that then further entangle them and further impede their journey back home, back to Godhead. Anyway, I've gone over time, so we'll maybe stop here and see if we have questions, if that's okay, because I know I'm slightly over time. Is that okay? Okay, you had your hand up first.
Yes, thank you for a very wonderful class. I wonder, could you elaborate how Jiva Goswami described attentive relationships?
Oh, okay. I can't elaborate so much on how he described it, but I was hearing that from different devotees in lectures. And I can give the basic principle. And the basic principle is that we advance by association. Devotees, we're not meant to be, we shouldn't be condescending, but at the same time we should try to take proper advantage of advanced association. Right? That means, especially like in Indian culture, whenever a saint comes into an environment, it's considered the cultural thing is to at least come and take darshan with such a personality. Right? At least come and see. But more than that, we should hear from advanced devotees. There's a very nice point that's made in Shastra that 11th canto, chapter 7, but text number 44. There's a verse. It's said that the pure devotee, they when they speak, it has that sound vibration is a beautiful vibration. Right? Now, it's also explained in Shastra that when they speak, their sound vibration carries their realization. So if we are able to hear submissively from advanced devotees, we will, and to act upon what they are saying, we will make huge advancement in leaps and bounds. You know? Because when Prabhupada speaks about Krishna, it's not even just that when he says Krishna, that is the Supreme Personality of God directly present in the form of sound vibration. So attentive relationships means we attentively try to hear from and serve advanced or pure devotees. And the converse of that, because we need to know what's to be done, so we can be eager for it, and we need to know what's to be avoided so it doesn't sneak up on us. What's to be avoided is offending the Vaishnavas. If there's one thing that we should take away, just don't offend the devotees. Don't offend the devotees. I know devotees who actually, they've sometimes gone a little mentally unstable due to offences. I've seen it. Right? I know devotees who've been in that situation like that. You don't even see them. They don't even come to the temple now. You know? It's that dangerous. Because Krishna, he can't stand it. He doesn't accept. He doesn't tolerate it. And even if the devotee forgives us, still Krishna may give us a reaction. It's not just because this is a technicality, but you apologize to a devotee you've offended. Even if they forgive you, Krishna may still give you a reaction. So that can be understood by attentive relationships. Okay. Thank you. So, do you have time, or we can?
Are you staying for it?
Yes, we can. I can speak with one to one. Okay. So forgive my rambling. Shri Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Janita Gopram Nandi,
His Grace Vṛndāvana ki jai.